Daniel Defoe, Robinson Crusoe, Part 55. May 8th. Went to the wreck and carried an iron crow to range up the deck, which lay now quite clear of the water or sand. I wrenched open 2 planks and brought them on shore, also with the tide. I left the iron crow in the wreck for next day. May 9th. Went to the wreck and with the crow made way into the body of the wreck and felt several casks and loosened them with the crow, but couldn't break them up. I felt also a roll of English lead and could stir it, but it was too heavy to remove. May 14th. Went every day to the wreck and got a great many pieces of timber and boards or plank and 200 or 300 weight of iron. May 15th. I carried 2 hatchets to try if I could not cut a piece of the roll of lead by placing the edge of one hatchet and driving it with the other, but as it lay about 1.5 feet in the water, I could not make any blow to drive the hatchet. May 16th. It had blown hard in the night, and the wreck appeared more broken by the force of the water, but I stayed so long in the woods to get pigeons for food that the tide prevented my going to the wreck that day. May 17th. I saw some pieces of the wreck blown on shore at a great distance, near 2 miles off me, but resolved to see what they were, and found it was a piece of the head, but too heavy for me to bring away. May 24th. Every day to this day I worked on the wreck, and with hard labor I loosened some things, so much was the crow that the first flowing tide several casks floated out, and 2 of the seamen's chests, but the wind blowing from the shore, nothing came to land that day but pieces of timber and hogshead, which had some Brazil pork in it, but the salt water and the sand had spoiled it. I continued this work every day to the 15th of June, except the time necessary to get food, which I always appointed during this part of my employment to be when the tide was up, that I might be ready when it was ebbed out, and by this time I had got timber and plank and ironwork enough to have built a good boat if I had known how, and also I got at several times and in several pieces near 100 weight one of the sheet lead. June 16th. Going down to the seaside, I found a large tortoise of turtle. This was the first I had seen, which it seems was only my misfortune, not any defect of the place or scarcity, for had I happened to be on the other side of the island, I might have had hundreds of them every day, as I found afterwards, but perhaps had paid dear enough for them. June 17th. I spent in cooking the turtle. I found in her 3 eggs, and her flesh was to me at that time the most savory and pleasant that ever I tasted in my life, having had no flesh but of goats and fowls since I landed in this horrid place. June 18th. Rained all day, and I stayed within. I thought at this time the rain felt cold, and I was something chilly, which I knew was not usual in that latitude. June 19th. Very ill and shivering as if the weather had been cold. June 20th. No rest all night. Violent pains in my head and feverish. June 21st. Very ill, frightened almost to death with the apprehensions of my sad condition to be sick and no help. Prayed to God for the first time since the storm of Hull, but scarce knew what I said or why, my thoughts being all confused.